You belong to him now. The words hit Isabel Reed harder than the bruising grip crushing her wrist. She stumbled across the cracked front porch, barely keeping her balance as her stepmother dragged her toward the curb. The afternoon sun glared off a line of glossy black SUVs parked outside the Reed family home, drawing curious neighbors to their windows. "Stop embarrassing this family," Diane Reed hissed through clenched teeth. "You should be grateful anyone is willing to take you." Isabel's throat tightened. I don't understand." "You don't need to understand." Diane shoved a worn suitcase into her chest before letting it crash onto the sidewalk. Vanessa Reed folded her arms against her designer blouse and laughed loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "I told you she'd cry." She looked Isabel up and down with theatrical disgust. Nobody marries the fat girl. A few people standing across the street exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. Vanessa kicked the suitcase, so it rolled into the gutter. "They're only taking you because he's a monster." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was worse. It was nervous. The kind of laughter people used when they were relieved someone else's life had become the tragedy instead of their own. Isabel lowered her eyes. She had learned years ago that crying only entertained them longer. Ever since her father died, 4 years earlier, this house had stopped feeling like home. Every room reminded her that she no longer belonged. Her father's photographs disappeared first. Then came the excuses, the unpaid bills, the endless chores, the insults disguised as advice. Lose weight, smile more, be useful. Don't expect anyone to love you. Eventually, Isabel stopped defending herself. Silence required less energy. A deep engine rumbled. The lead SUV came to a smooth stop, directly in front of the gate. Every conversation on the street died instantly. The rear doors of 2 vehicles opened at the same time. 4 men stepped out, wearing tailored black suits. Their movements were calm, disciplined, professional. No unnecessary gestures, no shouting, no intimidation. They didn't need any. The neighborhood already knew exactly who they served. One of the bodyguards approached Diane. "Mrs. Reed." She forced an eager smile. "Everything is ready." The man simply nodded before stepping aside. Then the rear passenger door of the center sedan opened. A polished black shoe touched the pavement. Slowly, Lorenzo Vitali stepped into the afternoon light. The city whispered his name with equal parts fear and respect. Some called him a criminal. Others quietly admitted he kept promises better than politicians ever had. No one questioned his authority. He wore a charcoal suit without a single wrinkle. No jewelry except a simple watch. No visible weapon. He didn't need one. Power surrounded him more convincingly than any gun ever could. His expression remained unreadable as his dark eyes settled on the family gathered outside the house. Finally, they stopped on Isabel. She instinctively lowered her gaze. He said nothing. Not yet. Diane hurried forward, almost tripping over herself. "Mr. Vitali." She extended both hands. "It is an honor." Lorenzo didn't take them. The awkward silence stretched several seconds before Diane slowly withdrew her hands. "This is Isabel," she continued with a brittle smile. "As requested." "Requested?" Isabel frowned. No one had ever asked what she wanted. No one had explained why any of this was happening. She had simply been told to pack, told she belonged to someone else now. Lorenzo's eyes never left Isabel. Instead of looking frightened, he looked puzzled, very slightly, as though something in front of him made no sense. Behind Isabel, Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh, for goodness sake." She shoved Isabel hard between the shoulder blades. "Move." Isabel stumbled forward. She caught herself before falling. The suitcase burst open when it struck the pavement. A faded sweater, several old books, a framed photograph of her father. The glass shattered. Isabel immediately dropped to her knees.
No!
With trembling fingers, she gathered the broken pieces. The picture, inside, had survived. The frame had not. Vanessa snorted. "Leave it." She reached the photograph first. Her high heel came down directly onto the cracked frame. Wood splintered beneath the pressure. I said, "Leave it." Isabel froze. That photograph was all she had left of her father. Her breathing became shallow. "Please." "Not this." She reached toward it anyway, before her fingers touched the frame. Diane grabbed her arm violently. "Enough!" She yanked Isabel upright, so roughly that Isabel cried out in pain. The sound echoed across the silent street. For the first time, Lorenzo moved. Only one step. Calm. Measured. But every bodyguard around him became instantly alert. His voice, when it came, was low enough that everyone leaned forward to hear. "Let her go." Diane blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said." Lorenzo's eyes settled on the fingers digging into Isabel's wrist. "Let her go." The grip loosened immediately. Isabel instinctively rubbed the reddening marks on her skin. No one spoke. No passing cars. No birds. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Lorenzo walked the remaining distance himself, not toward Diane, toward Isabel. She couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes. She expected anger, disgust, ownership. Instead, he bent down, picked up the broken photograph from the pavement, carefully brushed away the dust with his thumb, then handed it back to her using both hands, as though it were something valuable. His next question was so quiet that only those standing closest could hear it. "Did anyone ask whether you wanted to come?" Isabel stared at him in disbelief. Her lips parted. No answer came. Because no one had ever asked her that question before. Lorenzo slowly turned toward Diane. His expression remained perfectly composed. Only his eyes had changed. They had become impossibly cold. "Mrs. Reed." His voice never rose. "Who gave you permission?" He glanced once at the bruises forming around Isabel's wrist. "To touch my future wife like that?" The entire street fell silent. No one breathed. Diane Reed forced a brittle laugh, convinced she had misunderstood. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vitali. Your future wife." "Yes." His answer contained neither hesitation nor explanation. Vanessa stared at her mother. What is he talking about? Diane quickly recovered, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her jacket. There must be some misunderstanding. She stepped closer, with a practiced smile. "When your office contacted me about the family debt, I naturally assumed you were claiming Isabel as part of the settlement." Lorenzo regarded her silently. Then he asked a single question. "Who told you that?" The smile disappeared from Diane's face. "Well, no one said those exact words. You just assumed. We believed." "No." His voice remained calm. "You decided." The silence that followed was suffocating. Across the street, neighbors exchanged confused whispers. If he didn't ask for her, then why is he here? What debt are they talking about? Diane swallowed. "Our family owes your organization a considerable amount of money." "Correct. And you thought handing over another human being would settle a financial obligation." Her face flushed. "I only wanted what was best for everyone." Lorenzo looked toward Isabel. She still clutched the broken photograph against her chest, as though letting go would mean losing her father all over again. He noticed the faded sleeves of her cardigan, the carefully repaired seam near one shoulder, shoes that had been resoled more than once. Nothing about her appearance matched the financial records his investigators had reviewed. According to public documents, Richard Reed had left behind substantial assets. So why was his daughter dressed like someone barely surviving? Something was deeply wrong. Marco Vitali stepped quietly beside his cousin. Without interrupting, He handed Lorenzo a slim folder. Lorenzo opened it. Inside rested copies of bank statements, property transfers, debt agreements. He scanned them briefly, then closed the folder again. His eyes returned to Diane. "You informed your neighbors that I demanded your stepdaughter as payment." Diane hesitated. "I simplified the situation. You lied." It sounded easier. For whom? She couldn't answer. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward. "Look, if you're upset, we'll apologize." She gestured dismissively toward Isabel. "But honestly, you don't know what she's like." Lorenzo turned. "I'm listening." Vanessa crossed her arms confidently. "She's lazy." Isabel's eyes widened. "Liar." Vanessa ignored her. "She never contributes." Diane nodded eagerly. "She spends all day hiding in her room." Lorenzo looked at Isabel's hands. Small cuts crossed her fingers. Fresh burns marked one wrist. Detergent had dried the skin until it cracked around her knuckles. These were not the hands of someone avoiding work. They were the hands of someone who never stopped. He looked toward one of the neighboring houses. An elderly woman stood frozen behind an open gate. Lorenzo approached her. "May I ask you something?" She looked terrified. "Oh, of course. How long has Miss Reed lived here?" "Since she was a little girl." "And is she lazy?" The old woman looked toward Diane. Fear flashed across her face. Diane's stare warned her to stay quiet. Lorenzo noticed. "You have my word." His voice softened. "No one will retaliate for telling the truth." The woman lowered her eyes, then quietly said, "She works harder than anyone on this street." Diane stiffened. The woman continued, "I see her before sunrise. Cleaning, carrying groceries, mowing the lawn, taking care of the house. I've never seen anyone help her." Another neighbor slowly stepped forward. "She's right." A middle-aged mechanic removed his cap. "The girl even fixed my wife's garden after working all day." Vanessa scoffed. She volunteered. "No." The mechanic shook his head. "She said she couldn't accept payment because her family needed the money." Lorenzo watched Isabel. She looked horrified. Not because people were speaking. Because they were speaking for her. Perhaps for the first time in years. Nathan Cole, Lorenzo's legal advisor, quietly approached carrying a tablet. "I've confirmed something." Lorenzo accepted it. Nathan lowered his voice. "The debt exists. But it isn't attached to the Reed estate." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "The collateral belongs solely to Diane Reed. Richard Reed's name never appears." Lorenzo looked back at Diane. "So your husband's estate never guaranteed your loans?" Diane's composure cracked. "That isn't relevant." "It is entirely relevant." Nathan continued, "Legally speaking, Isabel has absolutely no responsibility for this debt." A murmur swept through the crowd. Vanessa stepped closer to her mother. "You told me Dad left us nothing." Diane glared at her. "Be quiet." Lorenzo noticed every reaction, every hesitation, every contradiction. Years of negotiating with criminals had taught him one lesson. People rarely lied with their words. They lied with the panic between them. He slowly walked back toward Isabel. She instinctively stepped backward. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You don't need to apologize." "I've caused trouble." "No. You've been placed inside it." She looked up, confused. His expression remained composed. Not pity, not romance. Simply respect. "When my office contacted this family," Lorenzo said quietly enough that only she could hear, "it was because I wanted to meet someone." She blinked. "Someone?" "Yes. I didn't know your name. I only knew a young woman once helped save the life of one of my employees." Isabel frowned. "I don't understand." "Several years ago, a warehouse fire. My driver was trapped." A woman called emergency services, stayed beside him, used her own jacket to stop the bleeding, then disappeared before anyone learned her name. Pieces of memory returned. Smoke, rain. An injured stranger. She had been late for work that day. She never expected anyone to remember. That was you. Her eyes widened. I never told anyone. You didn't. My people spent months trying to identify you, but you left no report. No reward request. No publicity. Marco smiled faintly. You simply went back to work. A tear slid down Isabel's cheek. I thought anyone would have done the same. Lorenzo studied her quietly. No, they wouldn't. He paused before continuing. I came here today because I wanted to thank the woman who saved one of my family. He looked toward Diane. Instead, I found someone treating her as though she had no value. The weight of those words settled over the entire street. Diane's breathing became uneven. This was spiraling beyond her control. If Lorenzo discovered everything, the forged signatures, the altered inheritance papers, the hidden trust, everything would collapse. She forced another smile. Mr. Vitale, perhaps we should discuss these matters privately. Lorenzo slowly closed the folder in his hands. Oh, we will. But not today. He turned toward Isabel. Holding out his hand, not to command her, only to offer a choice. Miss Reed. His voice was gentle. Would you allow me to show you why I truly came here? For several long seconds, she simply stared at the hand extended toward her. It was the first invitation anyone had offered her in years, and she realized, for the first time since her father's death, the next step would be hers to choose. Isabel looked at the hand Lorenzo had extended toward her. For years, every hand reaching in her direction had demanded something. Work harder. Stay quiet. Take the blame. This was different. There was no pressure in his expression, no command, only a choice. Slowly, she placed her trembling hand in his. Lorenzo didn't pull her forward. He simply matched her pace as they walked toward the waiting sedan. Behind them, Diane finally found her voice. Isabel! She turned instinctively. You are not walking away from this family. The words almost made Isabel stop. Almost. Then Lorenzo spoke without looking back. She is. His bodyguards quietly opened the rear door. Lorenzo gestured toward the seat. After you. Another surprise. No one had ever invited Isabel to enter first. She hesitated only a moment before climbing into the luxurious interior. Soft leather, fresh cedar, a faint scent of coffee. It felt like stepping into another world. Lorenzo entered from the opposite side. The door closed gently. Outside, the crowd remained frozen as the convoy slowly pulled away. Only when the vehicles disappeared around the corner did the neighborhood begin talking all at once. Inside the sedan, silence settled comfortably between them. Isabel kept both hands wrapped around her father's broken photograph. I'm sorry you had to witness all of that, she whispered. Lorenzo looked at her. You believe you should apologize because someone else mistreated you. She lowered her eyes. I suppose. No. His voice remained calm. That belief did not begin today. She couldn't answer, because he was right. For years, she had apologized for existing, for eating, for taking up space, for making people uncomfortable with a body she had never learned to love. The city rolled past the tinted windows. Finally, Lorenzo asked, when was the last time someone asked how you were? She searched her memory. Minutes passed. I don't remember. He nodded once. I suspected as much. Nearly 40 minutes later, the convoy entered a gated estate overlooking the river. No towering walls, no armed men displaying rifles. Only disciplined security and carefully maintained gardens. Isabel blinked. This Belongs to you? It belongs to everyone who works with me. She frowned. I don't understand. You will. Marco greeted them inside the entrance hall. Everything is prepared. Lorenzo turned toward Isabel. My physician is waiting. Fear instantly crossed her face. I'm not sick. Marco smiled kindly. No, but your wrist is swelling. Only then did Isabel notice the bruises Diane had left. Dark purple fingerprints already surrounded her skin. She instinctively hid her arm behind her back. I'm fine. Lorenzo answered quietly. No one who says that while hiding injuries is usually fine. Again, she had no response. Dr. Olivia Grant welcomed them into a bright examination room. Unlike hospitals Isabel remembered, there was no coldness here. Warm lighting, books, fresh flowers, comfort. Olivia smiled gently. I'm only going to make sure you're healthy. No needles unless absolutely necessary. That earned the smallest smile Isabel had managed all day. As Olivia examined the bruises, her expression slowly changed. She found healing cuts across Isabel's hands. Old burn marks near her forearms. A shoulder carrying years of repetitive strain. Then she quietly asked, Have you been doing all the housework yourself? Isabel nodded. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, repairs, shopping. Olivia looked at Lorenzo. He wasn't exaggerating. These injuries weren't caused in one day. She lowered her voice. They're years old. Lorenzo remained perfectly still. Yet Marco immediately recognized the dangerous silence. Whenever Lorenzo became this quiet, someone had usually made a very serious mistake. Several hours later, Nathan Cole entered Lorenzo's private study, carrying 3 thick folders. I've started reviewing the Reed estate. Lorenzo looked up. What did you find? Enough inconsistencies to concern me. Nathan spread copies across the desk. When Richard Reed died, his estate should have transferred into a protected family trust. It didn't. Marco frowned. Maybe there wasn't a trust. There was. Nathan slid forward another document. I found the registration. The trust existed. So where did it go? Nathan took a slow breath. That's the problem. It vanished. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. Vanished? The filing references, 12 supporting documents. There should be signatures, property schedules, beneficiary records. They're all missing. Marco leaned closer. Documents don't simply disappear. They do if someone removes them before probate closes. Nathan opened another folder. It gets worse. He pointed toward 2 signatures. Compare these. Lorenzo studied them. One belonged to Richard Reed. The second supposedly came from 6 months later. They're different. Nathan nodded. The second signature wasn't written by the same hand. Marco looked up sharply. Forgery. I can't prove it yet, but I strongly suspect it. Lorenzo slowly closed the folder. So Diane inherited assets she legally shouldn't have possessed. Nathan nodded. Possibly. And if that's true, he placed another document on top. Someone stole Isabel's inheritance. Meanwhile, Isabel wandered quietly through the estate library. She had never seen so many books. Thousands filled floor-to-ceiling shelves. She gently ran her fingertips along worn leather bindings. You like reading? She turned. Lorenzo stood near the doorway. She smiled shyly. My father and I came to the public library every Saturday. He always said. She paused. What did he say? Money can disappear overnight. Knowledge stays with you forever. Lorenzo looked around the room. He was right. She noticed one shelf containing old architecture books. My father loved these. He designed houses. I remember. She stopped. You remember? No. I read about him. He was respected. Pride briefly lit her face. It made him happy. What happened after he died? The question hung heavily between them. Finally, she answered. Everything changed. Diane said Dad had enormous debts, so we had to sell everything. The cars, the investments, the vacation cabin, even my college fund. She laughed quietly. I never questioned it. I thought. She swallowed. I thought that's what happened when people died. Lorenzo listened carefully. And did you ever see those debts? No. Any paperwork? No. Any meetings with lawyers? She shook her head again. I signed whatever Diane placed in front of me. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Did anyone explain those documents? No. Did anyone allow you to read them? No. He said nothing further. But pieces were beginning to fit together. Late that evening, Nathan entered once more, this time carrying a small fireproof archive box. I found this in county storage. He placed it carefully on the desk. The original probate inventory. Marco opened it. Inside rested faded receipts, insurance records, old correspondence. Then, one sealed envelope. Across the front, in Richard Reed's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 simple words. For Isabel, only if I'm gone. The room fell silent. Nathan looked at Lorenzo. This envelope was never delivered. Lorenzo slowly picked it up. The wax seal remained completely intact. Someone had hidden it for years. No one spoke. The sealed envelope rested in Lorenzo's hands like a forgotten piece of history. He looked toward Nathan. Has anyone else opened this? No. The county clerk confirmed it was catalogued after Richard Reed's death. Then it disappeared into storage. Marco frowned. So someone intentionally prevented it from reaching Isabel. Nathan nodded. That appears to be exactly what happened. Lorenzo turned toward the library doorway. Bring Isabel. She entered a few minutes later, still wearing one of the simple dresses Olivia had found for her. She hesitated when she noticed everyone standing around the table. Did something happen? Lorenzo held up the envelope. Does this handwriting look familiar? The moment she saw it, her breath caught. Dad. Her fingers trembled before they even touched the paper. She traced the letters of her own name. For Isabel, only if I'm gone. Tears blurred her vision. I thought. My stepmother told me Dad never left anything behind. Lorenzo quietly placed the envelope in her hands. This belongs to you. No one else. She looked uncertain. What if I'm not ready? You decide. Not me. Not the lawyers. Not your family. You. After several long breaths, she carefully broke the old wax seal. Inside rested a handwritten letter and a small brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. The room remained silent as she unfolded the first page. My dearest Isabel. Her father's handwriting immediately transported her back to childhood. Weekend breakfasts, construction sites, books stacked across the kitchen table. She struggled to continue reading through tears. If you are reading this, it means life has taken me away sooner than I hoped. The first thing I need you to know is that none of what happened was ever your fault. A sob escaped her lips. Lorenzo quietly moved closer, but didn't interrupt. The world will try to convince you that your kindness is weakness. Do not believe it. Your heart is your greatest strength. She covered her mouth. The words sounded exactly like him. There were no legal instructions, no complicated financial language, only a father's love, until she reached the final page. There is one thing I have hidden. If anyone except you finds it, our family's future disappears. The key enclosed opens the cedar box inside my old architectural studio. Everything you need to protect yourself is there. The combination to the inner safe is your birthday. I love you. Always. Dad. Silence filled the study. Nathan slowly looked up. architectural studio. I thought it was demolished. Isabel wiped away her tears. No, it was closed after Dad died. Diane said there was nothing left. Lorenzo exchanged a glance with Marco. There may be now. Early the following morning, 3 black vehicles stopped outside a neglected brick building on the edge of downtown. Dust coated every window. A faded sign still read, "Reed Architectural Design." Isabel stood frozen on the sidewalk. I haven't been here since the funeral. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Lorenzo noticed the way she hugged herself. Nervous? She nodded. I'm afraid nothing will be inside. And if there is? She looked toward the building. I'm afraid everything will change. Lorenzo gave a small smile. Sometimes those are the same fear. Marco unlocked the rusted front door. The hinges groaned. Inside, time seemed to have stopped. Rolls of blueprints still filled metal shelves. Coffee cups remained exactly where someone had left them years ago. Dust floated through narrow beams of morning sunlight. Isabel slowly walked deeper into the office. She touched her father's old drafting table. I used to sit here. He'd let me color while he worked. Her smile appeared for only a second, then disappeared again. Near the back wall stood a tall cedar cabinet, exactly as the letter described. With shaking hands, she inserted the brass key. Click. The lock opened immediately. Inside, there was another steel safe. She entered her birthday. The mechanism released with a heavy metallic sound. Marco carefully opened the safe door. Everyone stared. Not because of money. There wasn't any. Instead, dozens of carefully organized folders filled the shelves. Nathan immediately recognized legal seals, property deeds, trust documents, tax filings, insurance certificates, original blueprints, business contracts. Everything Richard Reed had spent a lifetime creating. Nathan turned page after page. Then suddenly stopped. His expression hardened. What is it? He held up one document. The original trust agreement. Lorenzo stepped beside him. Nathan pointed toward a paragraph. Richard Reed named only one beneficiary. He looked directly at Isabel. You. She blinked. Only? Me? Nathan nodded. The estate was never divided. Diane inherited absolutely nothing. Shock spread across Isabel's face. That's impossible. It isn't. Nathan pulled another document from the folder. This explains everything. He laid 2 signatures side by side. The original, and the one submitted to probate. Even without legal training, the difference was obvious. One signature flowed naturally. The other looked stiff, forced. Copied. Nathan exhaled slowly. Someone forged your father's signature. Marco muttered quietly. Diane. Lorenzo remained silent. Nathan continued reviewing the files. Minutes later, he found another envelope. Inside rested bank statements, checks, transfer authorizations, every payment leaving Richard Reed's accounts after his death. Nathan's eyes widened. These transfers, they weren't made to creditors. Where did they go? He turned another page, then another. Finally, he looked up. Every dollar was redirected into shell companies. Marco frowned. Owned by whom? Nathan rotated the document. Across the top appeared one familiar name, Diane Reed. The room became perfectly still. Back at the Reed residence. Diane paced nervously across the living room. Vanessa looked up from her phone. Mom, relax. He already took Isabel. What else could he possibly want? Diane didn't answer. She kept staring toward the window. Something felt wrong. Her phone suddenly rang. Unknown number. She answered immediately. Hello? A calm male voice replied. Mrs. Reed. This is Nathan Cole. I represent Mr. Lorenzo Vitale. Her stomach tightened. I've prepared legal notices regarding multiple forged estate documents. Silence. Nathan continued. We also recovered Richard Reed's original trust records this morning. The phone almost slipped from Diane's hand. Impossible. She had paid to make sure those files disappeared forever. Nathan spoke one final sentence. I strongly recommend you contact an attorney, because the next time we meet, it will be in court. The line disconnected. The phone slid from Diane's fingers onto the hardwood floor. Vanessa stared. What happened? Diane slowly looked toward the family portrait, hanging above the fireplace. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about Isabel. She was thinking about prison. 3 weeks later, every seat inside courtroom 14 was occupied. Reporters lined the back wall. Local business owners filled the public gallery. Neighbors from Isabel's old street quietly took seats together. Everyone wanted to witness the case that had become the city's biggest headline, the estate of Richard Reed. Judge Helen Brooks entered. The courtroom rose. Please be seated. The judge looked across both legal teams. Counselors, are we ready to proceed? Nathan Cole stood first. Yes, Your Honor. Across the room, Diane Reed appeared almost unrecognizable. The confidence she once wore so effortlessly had vanished. Vanessa sat beside her, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The proceedings began. Nathan approached the witness stand, carrying several organized binders. Your Honor, today's case is not simply about inheritance. It concerns years of deliberate fraud. He presented the original trust agreement, the recovered probate records, the forged signatures, the hidden financial transfers. One by one, every document had been authenticated, every chain of custody verified. The courtroom watched in complete silence. Judge Brooks adjusted her glasses as she examined the originals. These appear substantially different from the documents filed after Mr. Reed's death. Nathan nodded. They are. He called the forensic handwriting examiner. The expert compared enlarged signatures displayed on courtroom monitors. There is no reasonable professional doubt. The probate signature is a forgery. A quiet murmur spread through the gallery. Nathan continued. Our accounting investigation traced every major transfer made after Richard Reed's death. Charts appeared on the courtroom screens. Money moved from the estate into shell companies, then into accounts controlled solely by Diane Reed. Judge Brooks looked directly at Diane. Mrs. Reed, do you wish to explain these transactions? Diane swallowed hard. My husband wanted me to manage everything. Nathan immediately held up Richard Reed's handwritten letter. The deceased anticipated precisely this possibility. He requested permission to submit the recovered letter into evidence. Approved. Nathan carefully read only the relevant legal passage. If anything happens to me, every asset I own belongs to my daughter, Isabel. I have intentionally left detailed records to prevent anyone from depriving her of her future. The courtroom fell silent once again. Judge Brooks slowly folded her hands. Mrs. Reed, did you ever provide this letter to Miss Reed? No. Did you inform her of the trust? No. Did you disclose these financial records? No. Each answer became quieter, smaller, until there was nothing left to hide. Finally, Diane whispered, I was afraid. Nathan looked at her. Afraid of what? Of losing everything. And what about Isabel? Diane closed her eyes. She had no answer. The ruling came shortly before noon. Judge Brooks spoke clearly enough for every person inside the courtroom to hear. The court finds overwhelming evidence that Richard Reed's estate was obtained through fraud. The probate filings are hereby vacated. Ownership of all remaining estate assets shall immediately transfer to the rightful beneficiary. She looked toward Isabel. Miss Isabel Reed. Tears filled Isabel's eyes. Judge Brooks continued. The matter of criminal liability regarding the forged documents and financial fraud is referred to the district attorney for further proceedings. Court officers approached Diane. She didn't resist. Vanessa began crying, not because she had lost luxury, because, for the first time, consequences had arrived. Outside the courthouse, reporters surged forward. "Cameras! This way!" Miss Reed. Microphone stretched toward Isabel. Only weeks earlier, she would have lowered her head. Today, she stood taller, still gentle, still humble, but no longer invisible. One reporter asked, "Miss Reed, after everything your family put you through, do you hate them?" She thought carefully before answering. "No, I refuse to let hatred become the final thing they leave me." The crowd grew quiet. They spent years trying to convince me I had no worth. I won't spend another day letting them decide who I become. Several reporters lowered their microphones. No dramatic speech, no revenge, only truth. Months later, spring returned to the neighborhood where Isabel had once been publicly humiliated. Fresh flowers lined the sidewalks. Children rode bicycles through the street. Residents gathered for the reopening of the renovated Reed Community Learning Center. The old architectural studio had been transformed into a free education center, offering design classes, financial literacy programs, and scholarships for young people who could not afford college. The ribbon fluttered gently in the breeze. Isabel stood beside the entrance, not in expensive designer clothing, just an elegant blue dress her father would have loved. Olivia smiled beside her. "You nervous?" "A little." "You'll be wonderful." Across the street, the same elderly woman who had defended Isabel weeks earlier approached with tears in her eyes. "You remember me?" Isabel smiled warmly. "I never forgot." The woman embraced her. "I'm sorry we didn't speak sooner." Isabel hugged her back. "You spoke when it mattered." Nearby, the mechanic who had defended her during Lorenzo's first visit shook her hand proudly. "We always knew you deserved better." She laughed softly. "I wish I'd believed that myself." A familiar convoy quietly entered the street. Children stopped playing, not out of fear, out of curiosity. Lorenzo stepped from the lead vehicle, wearing a simple navy suit. No spectacle, no entourage pushing people aside. He walked directly toward Isabel. She smiled before he said a word. "You made it. I said I would." He noticed the restored photograph of Richard Reed, displayed inside the learning center. The cracked frame had been repaired, just like many things in Isabel's life. The mayor approached the microphone. "Today we recognize not only the restoration of a historic building, but the extraordinary woman whose courage transformed it into a place of hope." Applause filled the street. The mayor stepped aside. Lorenzo accepted the microphone only briefly. "I've spent many years being introduced by titles. Businessman, leader, sometimes worse." A few people laughed. He turned toward Isabel. "But today, I would rather introduce someone else." He gently reached for her hand. "This," he smiled, "is Isabel Reed. The woman who once believed she had nothing to offer. The woman who saved a stranger without asking for recognition. The woman who rebuilt her father's dream. And the woman I chose. Not because she needed saving, but because she reminds everyone around her what true strength looks like." The applause lasted even longer. Isabel looked at him with tears threatening once more. "You always make speeches better than I do." Lorenzo smiled. "I had an excellent teacher. When? The day you showed me kindness, without expecting anything in return." She laughed through her tears. For years, people had measured her by her appearance, her weight, her silence, her usefulness. Now, she was finally being seen for her character. Lorenzo quietly leaned closer, ready to go home. She looked around the neighborhood one last time. The place where she had once been discarded. The place where she had believed her life had ended. Instead, it had been the place where it truly began. She squeezed his hand. Yes, this time. I'm going because I choose to. Together, they walked toward the waiting car. Not as a frightened victim and a feared mafia boss, but as two people who had found something far more powerful than fear. Trust. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes kindness is never weakness. Tell us in the comments, which moment moved you the most? Lorenzo defending Isabel for the first time, or Isabel choosing forgiveness over revenge? We'd love to hear your thoughts, and we'll see you in the next story.